doesn't sound good, you know? My wife thought I ought to have this, but it needs a deeper tone. Anyway, calling the meeting to order. We're going to have final action on House Bill 2039, exempting disabled veterans from certain requirements and fees relating to hunting and fishing license. So we'll begin working this bill. Would the reviser please give a brief overview of the bill?
Good morning, committee. As it stands, the bill, House Bill 2039, would exempt disabled veterans as defined in the bill from needing a fishing or hunting license to hunt or fish in the state of Kansas.
Thank you. Are there any amendments on this bill?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. If the committee remembers where we started off, we decided that we would put in a very large new section 1. We had a couple of discussions. One was about the percent of disability. The offer that was in the bill to begin with was 50%. The existing regulation is at 30%. So the discussion at that point was not to disadvantage anyone who was between 30 and 50, because if we stuck with the 50, those people would not qualify any longer. So if you look at the balloon, the rather large balloon that's off to the right, does everyone have a copy of that? If not, I'll just maybe briefly go over it. So subject of the statute 32-920 and amendments, the Secretary of Wildlife and Parks or the Secretary's designee shall issue free of charge a permanent license to hunt and fish to any person residing in the state who submits to the Secretary satisfactory proof that the person is a disabled veteran. Any such person hunting or fishing in this state shall be subject to the provision of the rules and regulations relating to hunting or fishing. So then you'll see a subparagraph, disabled veteran, member of the armed forces, separated from the armed services under honorable conditions, and has a disability certified by the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs at equal to or greater than 30%. We had also in the original bill crossed out 75 years of age. That is reinserted as the second balloon at line 16. Word "or" was lined out on 24. That has been reinserted. Then if you look at page 3, line 34, the same one I just briefed on the age 75 that was lined out, that has been reinserted, and the same thing below that on line 39, or is reinserted. Turn over to page 7. What we wanted to make sure we did here is keep the provision for a half-price license between 65 and 75. And if you remember, we had a typo, so we started off with 60, and it was corrected to 65 during the meeting. So for a resident who is at least 65 years of age, but less than 75, the fees for an annual, this applies again to everyone, not just the vets. The fee for an annual hunting license shall be amount equal to 1/2 the fee for a general annual hunting license. Same thing for fishing license, and same thing for the combination license. And then down on lines 12 and 13, hunting and fishing was inserted before license.
Do you move your motion amendment?
I do move the motion, the amendment as just read, but actually the amendment that is printed is the one that's correct. So I do move that amendment.
Here a second. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Any discussion on the amendment? Representative, you may close.
I close my amendment.
You've heard the amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes seem to have it. The ayes do have it. It's passed. All these.
To pass.
Is there a motion concerning 2039? Representative Johnson?
I would move that we recommend the bill as amended, passed out favorably to the House as a body.
Is there a second? Representative Johnson. Is there any additional discussion on the bill? You may close.
I close, sir.
Thank you. All in, you've heard the motion and the amendments. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes seem to have it. The ayes do have it. Our bill finally got passed. I think Moses was in the wilderness shorter than this one. So we close on final action on HB 2039. Now we're going to have a hearing on HB 2010. Sir, please.
Good morning, committee. House Bill 2210 would amend KSA 28208, to remove the requirement for Senate confirmation of National Guard officers appointed by the governor. This bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book, and I can stand for questions.
Or any questions? This is a good group. Do we have any opponents? Major?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on HB 2210 this morning. Thank you also for your support of the men and women in our Kansas National Guard. I'm Major Carrie Beth Newhold, and I do legislative affairs for the Adjutant General's Department. So current statute states that appointment by general officers shall be subject to confirmation by the Kansas Senate as provided in KSA 75-431-5B and amendments thereto. So before any Kansas Army or Air National Guard officers are promoted to general officer, they go through a federal recognition process that includes a background check, presidential nomination, and U.S. Senate confirmation. That federal background check and confirmation process must be complete before the officer can be considered by the Kansas Senate for confirmation. Both the state and federal processes must be complete before the officer can actually be promoted or pin on that rank. The requirement for Kansas Senate confirmation can and does result in delays to general officer promotions in the state. The cause of this delay is a result of the timing of the federal process in relation to the state process. So the federal nomination and screening processes for general officers begin in October to December, depending on your service each year, and then the results are released between June and August. The Kansas legislative cycle, as you know, begins in January of each year. So because of the redundancy to be confirmed by the Kansas Senate, officers who have already been deemed eligible for promotion by the U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force, nominated by the President, and confirmed by the U.S. Senate have to wait an additional 6 to 9 months before the promotion can take effect. It should also be noted that the federal process of nomination and confirmation is more stringent than the state process, as it's a holistic process and doesn't do just a background check. There's also their evaluations, IG, misconduct. They look at a holistic approach. So this delay can also impact other promotions and assignments predicated on the promotion and movement of the senior officer. So in other words, in order for that colonel to be promoted to general officer, that impacts a lieutenant colonel coming up to colonel, a major up to lieutenant colonel, and so on. The requirement for state Senate confirmation may also lead to an officer deploying for a federal or state active duty mission without having the rank associated with their positional authorities. And this could create command and control challenges for a dual Title 10, Title 32 commander and interoperability challenges with the active components. Recently, we had an officer who was erroneously promoted to brigadier general by federal authorities, which was an inadvertent violation of the state statute. So the officer incurred a debt to the government for overpayment of pay and allowances, as well as multiple errors in his personnel file. And eliminating this state Senate confirmation would prevent this from occurring in the future. To note also, the adjutant general as the cabinet secretary would still be required to be confirmed by the state Senate as prescribed in section 203. But this proposed change would remove language for all other general officers and allow for efficiency and greater flexibility in senior officer assignments. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I can stand for any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious about the officer that was promoted to brigadier general, and it was by mistake. What happened?
He was
Did it all?
Yeah, so it came back and then he was promoted. Yes.
But he had to pay back?
Yes, ma'am.
Wasn't his fault. Thank you.
Well, it's, I think, clear to everyone in the committee and obviously clear to the National Guard Bureau that we're talking about those being considered for promotion to brigadier general. And just like your opinion, the way this is written, it just says officers. Do we need to add something in here that makes it clear that this relates to those officers being considered for placement as brigadiers?
Yes, sir. I think that would be appropriate.
We may want to have an amendment to that effect. If you can give us the right language, I think the reviser can take care of that. I know whoever presents it on the floor, it'll be clear then, because it'll be presented just like you did. So, thank you.
Thank you. Major, it says right here, a major general commander and 2 brigadier general deputy commanders. Will there be 3 consideration or all?
No, sir. So that is specific to our 35th division. Okay. So it would be more than that because we have a couple others.
Are there any other questions? Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Now, are there any proponents? Any opponents? Any neutrals? Thank you. Guess the hearing is closed. Now going on, closing hearing on 2010. Now on to the next bill, 2011. Advisors, please give us a description.
Good morning again, committee. House Bill 2211 would establish the Office of Homeland Security within the Adjutant General's office and prescribe the duties and powers within that office. House Bill 2211 authorizes the Adjutant General to make expenditures within appropriations for the purpose of Homeland Security. House Bill 2211 requires that the Adjutant General's office provides the facilities, budget, and administrative support for the Office of Homeland Security and its employees, and maintain all records collected and maintained by the Office of Homeland Security. This bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book.
Questions? Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have quite a few questions. One of the first issues I have pertains to the Kansas Constitution, which very specifically in the Bill of Rights, standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty, shall not be tolerated, and the military shall be in strict subordination to the civil power. Would this bill contradict our constitutional statute?
I believe that question requires a little bit of research. So I'd be happy to look into the Kansas Constitution and get back to you with a proper answer.
Very fair. You are aware that the governor has already established this office. Is that correct? It already is in existence.
I believe so, but I also believe there are controversies after me that might be able to speak to that a little bit better about the establishment of that office.
Well, I understand that. My question is that it was established under executive order.
Correct.
And once it's established by an executive order and enforced, it is in fact a state agency.
Again, I may need to do a little bit of research about that question.
I completely respect that answer. My next question would we need to send this to the Kansas Attorney General's office for an official opinion on whether or not the current executive order is in violation of the Kansas Constitution?
I believe that would be up to your discretion if you would like an opinion from the Attorney General.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Representative Ruiz?
I believe an executive order can be changed because it's not codified.
Mhm.
Right?
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Thank you very much. Now we will go to opponents to HB 2011. Are there any proponents? Yes, sir. Please tell us who you are and who you represent.
And I understand the questions we have there, and I will get to those. But the first big one, we had the typographical error of all time in House Bill 2211 that said, that I want to make sure everybody's aware of. In line 10, the word detention was mistakenly added in the bill instead of the word detection. Massive, massive difference. We don't do that. That's not what we do. We would respectfully ask that no matter what happens with this bill, that this committee amend the bill to clarify that our department's role is solely dedicated to analysis, in particular Homeland Security analysis to keep Kansas safe, and not powers of any law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. There is an amendment. Oh, yes, we have one. Representative Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So you are going to address my comments, you said?
Yes, sir, I can do that, or I can read the testimony too. I just want whatever procedurally you wanted to do first, sir.
Well, then go ahead and read your testimony, and I might have other questions.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 2211 today on behalf of the Adjutant General's Department. In March of 2011, Governor Brownback's Executive Order 1105 appointed the Adjutant General as the Homeland Security Advisor of the state of Kansas and the Director of the Kansas Homeland Security Office. In the nearly 12 years since then, Homeland Security professionals representing law enforcement, information technology, bioscience, agriculture, and private sector owners and operators of Kansas critical infrastructure have worked together to protect Kansas against terrorism, foreign malign activities, and disruptive threats to critical networks. Every day, these dedicated patriots quietly carry out their duties, identifying threats presented in non-routine situations by asymmetric actors and emerging dynamics that threaten our critical infrastructure. They directly support senior government officials and agencies, as well as industry leaders, in understanding threats, and then they work to develop solutions and strategies to protect Kansas' economic security and the individual freedoms of our citizens. If you're wondering what we as a state face in the years ahead, the short answer is a wildly complex geopolitical security environment featuring old and emerging actors, non-state entities, and aggressive nation states gaining access to and increasingly employing powerful new technologies and capabilities, and a modern civilization ever dependent on interlinked networks in ways previously never contemplated. Emerging fields like artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, nanotechnology, computer automation, machine learning, and quantum computing offer amazing promise. However, in the hands of those who wish the United States harm, these powerful tools become effective weapons to destabilize, kill, and defeat. The potential of advanced technologies and economic development offers Kansas businesses and industry tremendous promise, but those opportunities will need to be defended against misappropriation, intellectual property theft, and harm from those same groups previously mentioned. Given these and other Homeland Security threats, we ask that the legislature formalize the Kansas Homeland Security Office as outlined in the proposed bill. House Bill 2211 codifies the decade's previous work by adding an article to Chapter 48 for Kansas Homeland Security with sections for definitions, establishment of powers and duties of the Kansas Homeland Security Advisor. The purpose of this legislation is to designate a state entity specifically tasked with responsibilities and coordination among all Homeland Security partners. Its continuing role will be to work with governmental and critical infrastructure partners to continue identification of current threats and disruptive trends, placing Kansas in the best possible position to navigate an uncertain future and emerge into that future not only safer, but as a stronger and more prosperous state. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I stand ready for your questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, are you a civilian employee?
Yes, sir.
Are you under the classified section of the state of Kansas?
I am, sir.
And that was done by executive order and not by action of the legislature?
I'm not sure I'm tracking, sir. Do you mean my position as Homeland Security Advisor or?
As a classified employee?
I'm not sure, sir.
Okay. Is the Director of Homeland Security a civilian position?
Yes, sir.
So he has no power or authority to act as Adjutant General during the time he's acting as a Homeland Security. Is that correct?
Correct.
So do you find that to be a contradiction? We carry his name, and as I was looking at your website, very clearly listed him as Adjutant General, which is a military surname, and it appears to everyone that in fact he is operating as Adjutant General of the National Guard.
So the Adjutant General, since that 2011 executive order, has three primary roles. Obviously, head of the National Guard, Army and Air National Guard, head of a Division of Emergency Management, and as per that executive order, the advisor, Homeland Security Advisor for Kansas. Each state has a Homeland Security Advisor that's designated by the governor.
Okay. Go back to the issue.
Yes, sir.
It says under our Constitution that shall be at the direction of the legislature. It's a very specific constitutional statement, a couple hundred, or 160 years old. The legislature has the authority over the militia, not the governor in terms of appointments or operation. So if the governor takes action to create a new position that involves the National Guard in any way, which you've testified will include your facilities, joint equipment, and all of that, is that a violation of the constitutional part of our government?
Sir, again, I'm not an attorney and I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I couldn't speak to that. All I can tell you is it's absolutely one of the three roles. Again, it's a civilian section of this. We work largely with law enforcement. We work with owners of critical infrastructure, all civilians that we bring in with the goal of protecting the critical infrastructure of Kansas from everything from malign foreign activities, of cyber concerns, physical attacks, all of that. Again, what we do, our role primarily is advising ahead of time to try to help policymakers make better policy and raise their awareness of concerns and threats that are out there. We don't respond. That's not what we do.
Okay, could I ask a quick question? Under the statutes, and I wasn't very familiar with this, so I need a little help. The Fusion Center, powers and duty, Homeland Security Policy and relevant threat warning in order to protect life, property in Kansas and the Great Plains region. Could you help me out? What is the Fusion Center? That's Kansas 483703.
Yes, sir. The Senate Bill 184 in 2017 was established by the legislature, unanimous vote in the House and Senate, to establish the Fusion Center to fulfill these primary roles that identify threats for Kansas, specifically to critical infrastructure, but some of these other things that are mentioned in Senate Bill 184.
Okay, with that, 483708, Fusion Center, legal services provided by the Attorney General, Office of the Attorney General shall provide legal counsel to the Kansas Intelligent Fusion Center. The Attorney General shall assign an attorney to serve as privacy and civil liberties counsel to the Kansas Intelligence Fusion. Goes on, is there any part of what is already in law in the Fusion Center in the current bill for Homeland Security?
You mean as far as duties and responsibilities, sir? Or
Yes, supervision by the Kansas Attorney General's office.
so the positions primarily we're talking about are the Fusion Center positions, and there is oversight by an oversight board that's chaired by the Attorney General to make sure that's our civil liberties officer and privacy officer, and so we've operated that way since 2017.
And I find that excellent. Why is there nothing in the current bill that says something similar for the protection of security and civil liberties?
Be more than open to having that added if that's necessary, or be seen as a wise move. That'd be fantastic for us. We're fairly transparent on what we do as much as we can with classified information, but the process itself, absolutely fine with civil liberties and privacy protection.
Okay, next question. Given the scope of what you would do you follow the Department of Defense, the Justice Department and FBI guidelines in the definitions of domestic terrorism?
Sir, we don't. Domestic terrorism, anything to do with U.S. persons, that's not really what we do. So primarily, that's a law enforcement function. If there's anything that we see that has that looks like it may be a concern as far as someone actually carrying something out, we pass that off to law enforcement. We don't maintain that. We don't hold that. We don't hold that information. That's not what we do. We're primarily looking at three things: terrorism, foreign malign activities, so that'd be state actors, the big four that I'm sure you're probably aware of, and then any sort of attacks or threats to our critical infrastructure.
Okay, well, in looking at the website, which is published, one of the documents that you share, the NTAS Guide, National Terrorism Advisory System Public Guide, clearly relates to domestic terrorism and manners in which it should be reported to the federal government. It
So-
makes no mention whatsoever of dealing with state agencies.
What's that document, sir?
Your NTAS guide, it's accessible by clicking on the link on the home page that has your commander's picture on it. It's able to be looked up. It's available.
So we can pass information. When I say we, law enforcement will pass that information along if it's deemed to be anything that's requires, how do I say this? Anything that would fall into that category of terrorism can be reported back east to federal partners. But again, that largely goes through our our law enforcement partners here. So we have two folks that are embedded with the Fusion Center. That's Kansas Highway Patrol and Kansas KBI officer that work with that. They handle that. Our analysts do not do any work in that regard, sir.
But that's not in the current bill, correct?
Again, if we need to add anything to clarify or replicate that same oversight on that one, that would be fine, sir.
Well, this is your bill and you presented it as is. And now you're asking the committee to correct it and make it legal. I mean, that's how I'm sensing it. One other little question and I will be quiet.
Sure.
The definitions of domestic terrorist is established by the federal government, Department of Justice, utilized by all federal agencies. 2 of the 5, domestic terrorism, animal rights activist, and abortion extremist. Could you tell me what an abortion extremist is?
No, sir. And like I said, we do not deal with any sort of definition or going down that regard. I'm sorry. We don't go down anything to do that I would argue gets in anything to do with First Amendment protections. If someone is doing something that is deemed by law enforcement to be heading towards violence or call to violence, our law enforcement partners deal with that. But again, that's the analytical capabilities, what we're talking about on the Fusion Center and with the Kansas Homeland Security Office, or the proposals on that one, is that we deal primarily with nation state threats to the state, to any calls of terrorism that would be proposed by or spurred on by any of those states, and anything that could be deemed as a threat to any network or system that we're reliant on for our critical infrastructure.
You are aware you do or will under this bill have the authority to access private information for educational rights, school rights, medical rights through your analysts. And we know that analysts have a challenge to do so. Very experienced dealing with analysts in the military. And since you are still a paramilitary operation because of where you're at, what are our guarantees? Because there's nothing in this bill that, in fact, information on citizens, et cetera, is not kept and under the guise of secrecy is utilized by someone for political gain.
Sir, again, we've operated under that Senate Bill 184, that 2017 structure with the oversight built into that. This would continue on that function. If we need to change anything with that bill or add that or table this and come back to that to build those structures in, absolutely more than willing and happy to take a look at that.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir. I just the one comment, you'd like to table this. Is it appropriate for me to make a motion to table this until they are able to get the information? I'm asking, is it clarified? I would move that we table this hearing until they are available to. Okay, I understand that. I'm done. Thank you very much, and I do appreciate your answering.
Yes, Representative.
Thanks for your testimony this morning. I just have a question because I know you said that every state has an advisor, Homeland Security advisor, which I'm assuming maybe the Adjutant General in all those states. I don't know if that is true or not.
Every state has a different model.
Okay, and so and organizing this office and establishing this Office of Homeland Security, do other states have a similar Office of Homeland Security within the Adjutant General's Department? And if so, and if so, are we trying to model this after some other state?
So the answer to that is the Adjutant General, multiple states, some of them serve multiple hats or roles. Some of them are emergency management and National Guard. Some are emergency management, National Guard, and Homeland Security. The tie-in with that was, again, looking at foreign threats to the country, the ability of the Adjutant General to have a classified facility. So instead of relying on the federal government, we're able to pull up that threat information for ourselves and bring that forward to our critical infrastructure partners in a way that we protect privacy and that we're able to develop some key roles and solutions. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Questions, Representative Reese?
Statement. We do have a very famous incident of a person who was deemed anti-abortion extremist. And that was in 2009 when the physician out of Wichita was murdered. So Kansas is known for that one incident. And partly because of that, that definition of the anti-abortion extremist was even put into place.
Representative Weigel? Quick question, we need to kind of move along.
It'll be quick, and I want to get a response. You mentioned that you've been operating basically under this since, I think you said 2017. Was that correct?
Yes, sir.
But the fusion centers have been in existence prior to 2017. Is that also not correct? Because I can remember in my other life as a state agent that I believe I went to a fusion center basically getting to understand what was going on. And I believe that was over in Kansas City area, if I remember right. It's been some time ago. So are they still operating basically the way it was then?
So Kansas has a very unique model in that we actually include very unique as far as most of the models in the state, in that we include folks like from agriculture, private industry, owners of critical infrastructure. The goal, again, is there's a lot of threats out there, and they're persistent threats from some big actors. And so for us to be able to bring all those people under one hat and then have them take a look at some of those threats specific to Kansas is worth a lot. A lot of other fusion centers do not work at the classified level, and so they depend on the federal government to share information with them that they will deem as a threat to the states, and they work largely with law enforcement only. So things like agriculture, critical infrastructure, any industry partners, power utilities, that sort of thing is typically not what they do.
And as far as you know, how, as long as you've been in this position, there's never been any nefarious type activities going on that would circumvent what we want to do here.
No, sir, because again, with that oversight over the fusion center, which is where that is taken care of, with the Attorney General, and again, I don't have to point out the obvious of the political interest there. We have heavy oversight. We also have built into our design structurally. For example, there isn't just one big room with military personnel and all that. They're completely separated. Badges don't work on either side. Any information that comes down has a very, very robust, strict process. When you work in a classified facility, there's a lot of rigor that comes with that. Everybody in there that has a clearance knows that if they do something wrong, it's not a slap on the wrist or get brought in front of a committee or anything, you go to jail. And so that's taken extraordinarily very, very serious. And again, the whole goal of that is to help policymakers in Kansas make better decisions for the security of Kansas without relying on other folks and bringing in all the active partners. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Goddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for my own edification, was there a motion made to table and did it die for a lack of a second, or was? Say again, sir?
To the proponents and the opponents, neutrals, and then we'll do them.
Okay, going through the whole testimony and then do it. Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
yes, sir. Thank you.
Do we have any other proponents? Any other proponents? We'll go on to the opponents, and the first one opponent, it would be Representative Pat Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. I'm Representative Pat Proctor. I serve the people of Leavenworth and Fort Leavenworth here in the State House. But I'm actually here today as a Kansas citizen and as a veteran and also as a Homeland Security expert. I teach in the Homeland Security program at Wichita State. I'm not here representing Wichita State. I'm representing myself here, but that I bring that knowledge to bear as I talk to you today. Our founders were deeply suspicious of the military. They had just fought a revolutionary war against the British where law was being enforced by soldiers, and they did not want that for our nation. That many times in our history, we barely had an army at all in this country. I mean, it was just a handful of companies, a few hundred soldiers at some points in our history. And it's because the founders were deeply suspicious of having a standing army. They saw it as a threat to liberty for much of our history. And it's really enshrined in our law, in our Constitution, and in our Kansas Constitution. It's carried over that there's a clear separation between law enforcement and military. Because law enforcement, their purpose is to keep the peace. Why we call them peace officers. They keep the peace in our communities. The purpose of the military is to defend the country against the enemies of the state. And when you put the military in charge of law enforcement, the people start to look like enemies of the state. And our founders realized that, and that's why they never gave the military the role of law enforcement. Now there is the Insurrection Act. The president, if all hell breaks loose someplace, the president can declare an insurrection and can have the military temporarily enforce law. But those are very restricted cases, and the military doesn't enforce the law. I'd like to give you a few examples. When we send the military down to the southern border to assist the Border Patrol in enforcing our immigration law, they don't arrest anybody. They provide their equipment to observe the border and then tell law enforcement when they observe something, and then the law enforcement goes and enforces the law. Another example, when I was at the Big Red One, we were bringing the Gray Eagle, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle, to Fort Riley. We went through machination after machination to make sure that equipment was not ever used accidentally or intentionally to surveil Kansans. There are very strict areas where it can be flown because we understood that that was a violation of the liberty of civilians. This bill, I appreciate that the proponent noted that they meant detection, not detention, but I'm troubled by detection too, because detection is surveillance. What we are doing is we are setting up an agency under the military with the mission of surveilling Kansans. That's what detection means. Make no mistake about it. I'm really glad that this bill was brought because I think it uncovers something that's been growing and creeping inside Kansas that a lot of us weren't aware of, which is that the military is already doing this. And I hope not only that this bill gets tabled, but that we go back and we do some legislation to put Homeland Security functions firmly under the Attorney General. That's really the two things I'd leave you with, and before I stand for questions, are at best, this is redundant because we already have an Attorney General and a KBI and a Highway Patrol that are enshrined in our statutes and Constitution with the law enforcement function. And so why we need to set up an opposing law enforcement arm under the National Guard. And I appreciate he says, well, when he's the Director of Homeland Security, he's not a general officer. Yeah, I mean, if somebody comes to him with a question, does he take off his stars, set them on the table, answer the question, and put them back on? It's a distinction without a difference. So at best, this is redundant, but at worst, this is this is harmful, right? We at the national level right now, we are wrestling with the consequences of having formed the Homeland Security Department at the national level, and there's a lot of concern that the laws that were designed to combat foreign terrorism are now being used against American citizens. So why we would set up voluntarily the same system in Kansas just confounds me. And I could go on all day, Mr. Chair, but I won't. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Ruiz.
Thank you for your presentation. I hear the issue even with the word detection. I get it. But you were saying that this should probably more properly be put under the Attorney General.
Yes, Representative, if we do it at all, we should do this under the Attorney General. Because
so what if the Attorney General uses the word detection? So what if what do we do?
Yeah, exactly. I said if we do it at all, I think it's a terrible idea, but if we're going to do it, that would be the proper place for it. But I would contend that it's not a good idea at all.
I agree. There are a lot of people in Kansas that would not trust our current Attorney General. There are a lot of blurred lines that he has been known to do. And so I think detection, he would very much use that. Thank you.
I didn't say all that, but yeah.
Representative Dodson.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Would you mind just, because I know your background, can you talk a little bit about the powers that the governor has with the National Guard and largely what we're doing with the National Guard in the way of natural disasters and so on? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So, this came to light all over again over the whole vaccination controversy and mandatory vaccination. And some of the members here in this room signed on to a letter with me to the TAG asking him under what authority he could demand vaccinations when we had passed a law saying that the state agencies couldn't mandate vaccines. And he gave us a tutorial on the fact that this isn't really a state militia. Since the reform of the War Department time in 1918, the Guard is actually, when you enlist in the Guard, you're both a Kansas National Guards person, and then you're also in the National Guard of the United States. And because of that, the president can activate the Guard to go to Iraq, go to Afghanistan, go to the border. And when they're activated under that, they're under Title 10 authorities. They're basically no different than an active duty soldier. But because they're also the Kansas National Guard, the governor can activate them under Title 32. We pay their salary and they have different authorities. And that in that capacity, they can do some quasi law enforcement things, but generally they're not used unless like I said, all hell's broken loose and they're doing like riot control or something like that.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next opponent would be Nicholas Reinecker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Nick Reinecker, a private citizen from Inman, Kansas. I'm not an expert on some of these matters, but I am grateful for being allowed to be part of the process here. There is no absolute safeguard from terror. However, when a foreign balloon is allowed to intrude on our national soil, while ordinary citizens are surveilled to detect and labeled for the possible future detainment, the only safeguard is to return to the basics of our constitutional republic. Nowhere in this bill is language referencing our founding documents as the foundation for application, and that is a concern. For I believe, acting through the Constitution of the United States, the people of the several states created the federal government to be their agent in the exercise of a few defined powers, while reserving for the state governments the power to legislate all matters concerning the lives, liberties, and properties of citizens in the ordinary course of affairs. The limitation of the federal government's power is affirmed under Amendment 10 of the Constitution of the United States, which defines the total scope of federal powers as being those that have been delegated, not surrendered, not abdicated, and not duplicated by the people of the several states to the federal government, and all powers not delegated to the federal government in the Constitution of the United States are reserved to the states respectively or the people themselves. If the federal government assumes powers that the people did not grant it in the Constitution of the United States, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. The several states also of the United States respect the proper role of the federal government, but reject the proposition that such respect requires unlimited submission. If the federal government created by a compact among the states were the exclusive or final judge of the extent of the powers granted to it by the states through the Constitution, the federal government's discretion, and not the Constitution of the United States, would necessarily become the measure of those powers. But to the contrary, as in all other cases of compacts among powers having no common judge, each party has an equal right to judge for itself as to whether infractions of the compact have occurred, as well as to determine the mode and measure of redress. Although the several states have granted supremacy to laws and treaties made under the powers granted in the Constitution of the United States, such supremacy does not extend to federal statutes, state or federal executive orders, administrative orders, court orders, rules, regulations, or other actions that collect data or restrict or prohibit such individual rights, which are exclusively within the borders of Kansas. And such statutes, executive orders, and so on exceed the powers granted to the federal government except to the extent they are necessary and proper for governing and regulating the United States Armed Forces or for organizing, arming, and disciplining militia forces actively employed in the service of the United States
Excuse me, Nicholas,
Armed Force. Yes.
almost done.
Yes, this bill exploits the status quo that was birthed after the events of September 11th, 2001, when Congress acted and the states allowed through fear and apathy the centralization and growth of government. This action convoluted the dynamics of intelligence apparatus with irrational inclusion and separation of agencies. I believe any fruit from this tree will inherently be compromised, for although some of what is done may be righteous by those who do care about this country, it is, if not in the boundaries of the Constitution, when the unrighteous wield the sword, the results will be fatal. The ability to run a monarchy without proper oversight will be the result. To avoid a laundry list of abuses and controversies such as poor intelligence recalls, questionable future consideration of defining threats, funding mismanagement, span of control issues, and other dysfunction, and to thwart a national police force, I will offer instead the mitigative solution that does not compromise our state sovereignty. That is the reinstatement and reactivation of the Kansas State Guard. Finally, I want to say this is not personal, this is constitutional, and I have the utmost respect for members of the military who sacrificed for my freedoms, and may God bless them richly. Thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? Questions? Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you very much. I also want you to pay attention to the written testimony Representative Trevor Jacobs, Thomas Cushing, Peggy Mass, Jamie Sue Potter, Carrie Sue Vosberg, Roger Lomschek, and Brett Anderson. I also have an amendment to change the word from detention to detection. Here's a second on that. Second, Virgil. Have any discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Thank you, it's passed. Do we have any other amendments? Representative Johnson. We have a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to the request of the proponent, I would move that we table this hearing until they can complete additional materials and changes and present those, and also to allow me to seek an Attorney General's opinion. I'd move that we table it.
Second. Representative Butler, seconded. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Ayes seem to have it. The ayes do have it. It's been tabled. I also want to thank you for this meeting. We got done less than an hour, which I was pleased. Also want to tell you about the next meeting will be Thursday. We will hear final action on 2210. And our next meeting should be short. Excuse me, Herb, I'm sorry. You have some good news to give us. Would you like to speak now or do it on Thursday? Okay.
Chairman, just briefly, I will address Thursday, but I would like to thank Representative Ruiz, Ranking Member Ballard of the Social Service Budget Committee, and the rest of the committee. We asked for a proviso for Kansas VFW for extra money for our VCAP program that I will talk to you about on Thursday. And we asked for $150,000. They have given us $200,000. Is that correct? To help with our program. So you have the testimony. You can look through it and be prepared to ask me questions because I want to answer a lot of them. So thank you for your time. And I have state officers here today that may or may not be able to be here Thursday, and also my service officers, but we'll be here with bells on. Thank you.
That's amazing. Ask for 150 and get 200,000. I've never heard of that before. Representative Ruiz.
Before we celebrate too much, it still has to go through appropriation. So let's, yeah, it is a huge hurdle. Thank you.
Is there anything else for the good of the cause? I hear a motion to adjournment. A second? I thought we all want to stay here longer. Representative Thompson, the meeting's adjourned.